Welcome to the last session of paper presentation. This session focuses on blockchain, and for this session we have with us two of the session chairs, Professor Vishal Saraswat and Professor Abhishek Sharma. So over to you to the session chair. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to the last session of Indocrypt. It's on blockchains, and we have three very interesting papers on lapse time consensus protocols, on time release cryptography from minimal circuit assumptions, and succinct publicly certifiable proofs. Or can a blockchain verify a designated verifier proof? So we'll start with the first paper on elapsed time consensus protocol by Mike Bauman, Debajyoti Das, Avravdeep Mandal, and Hart Montgomery. And Debajyoti will present the paper. So on to you, Debajyoti.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. Now I'm going to talk about our work on elapsed time consensus protocols, which is one class of consensus protocols for blockchains. Blockchains can be thought as a distributed database or distributed ledger. Let's look at it with an example. If you are looking at a centralized database, for example, a bank database, the bank controls the whole database. All the client data, all the transactions are controlled by the bank, and all the update, delete, addition, all are done by the bank itself. However, in case of distributed databases, in this example, you can see there are 4 nodes. All the 4 nodes collectively control the database. No one node has complete control over the database, and the clients interact with the database by talking to those nodes. And how the nodes keep the data? Each node has a copy of the database, especially in case of blockchain. And data is stored in the form of blocks. So basically, they are data blocks with a pointer to the previous block. So they are literal data blocks, and they are chained together. And that's why they are called blockchains. And the nodes need to use a consensus protocol to agree on the current 2 state of the system at any given point of time. With that premise, let me give you an overview of what I'm going to talk about in this presentation. First, I'm going to talk about what are elapsed time consensus protocols, or why even think about them. Then I'm going to talk about a variation of elapsed time consensus protocols with trusted execution environment. And then I'm going to talk about another variation where you don't have trusted execution environments, or they can be compromised. And then that is with a primitive called ZTest. And then I'm going to discuss about the security of elapsed time consensus protocols with ZTest, which is one of the main highlights of our paper. And then I'm going to talk about the implications of our work. So before I move to what are elapsed time consensus protocols, let us look at one of a really famous consensus protocol, which is proof of work. Proof of work protocols are scalable to tens of thousands of participants because of its low communication overhead. In an optimistic case, the communication overhead is order of n for n participants per new block. How these protocols work? Again, let's look at it with an example. Suppose there are 4 nodes, node A, node B, node C, node D. They all try to solve a cryptographically hard problem. And suppose node A solves the problem first, then node A is the one who releases the next block. And then node A broadcasts the block to everyone. And that's how every new block gets released. And that's how they achieve consensus among who becomes the leader for every round. However, it comes with a caveat. Each node is solving a cryptographically hard problem, and that is high energy consuming. For example, the power consumed for Bitcoin proof of work network in January 2019 was around 40 terawatt hour, which is comparable to the power use of a small country. And of course, we want to save the environment, we want to have less carbon footprint, and we don't want to pay for electricity bill. That's why we want to look at low power alternatives. There are few alternatives. One prominent alternative is BFT consensus, or a Byzantine fault tolerant consensus. However, these protocols have high communication overhead, order of n square per new block when there are n participants in the system. So if there are 10,000 participants, the protocol will take a huge time to reach consensus. And that's why these protocols does not scale well with large number of participants. Also, there are proof of stake systems, but proof of stake systems either internally use BFT-based consensus, for example, Ouroboros protocol, and that will have high communication overhead. And there is another variation called chain-based proof of stake systems, but they have either strong security assumptions or they lack formal security proofs. And then there comes proof of elapsed time. Till now, these protocols, for example, proof of elapsed time or proof of lock, these protocols did not have any formal security proof. And of course, you don't want to use any protocol where you don't know what security you are achieving. Even though these protocols are low energy consuming, have low communication overhead, still you don't have the confidence to use them. But that is until now. With our work, we fill that gap and we provide formal security proof for these elapsed time consensus protocols. So what are elapsed time consensus protocols? So in literature, there are mainly two elapsed time consensus protocols. One is proof of elapsed time or POET, and another is proof of lock. These are similar protocols, but not exactly identical. But what we do in our paper is we get rid of their nitty-gritty details. For example, bootstrapping, how they solve collision, etc. And we define a generalized version of them. In both protocols, proof of work is replaced with randomly generated delays. Again, how that works, let's look at it with an example. There are 4 nodes, node A, node B, node C, node D. In a given round, node A generates a random delay, say 3, following a probability distribution. Node B, using the same probability distribution, generates a delay 6. Node C generates the delay 6, and node D generates the delay 5. Since node A has the least delay, then node A is allowed to publish the block, and node A broadcast it to everyone. This protocol works perfectly if all the nodes are honest and all the nodes know that each one of them are honest and the delays are generated correctly. But you cannot trust that. And that's where the trusted execution environment comes into picture. For example, in proof of elapsed time protocol, they use Intel SGX. And Intel SGX, that trusted execution environment, proves that the delay has been generated correctly. And other protocol parties can verify that. And since we are introducing trusted execution environments and everyone has to identify that, it inherently implies that it is a permission setting. How this works? A node will run the protocol program along with a trusted execution environment inside it. When the node program needs to generate a delay, the node program will query the TE. Then the TE will pick the delay from the specified probability distribution specified by the protocol description. And TE will wait for that amount of time. And then TE will provide the delay along with a delay certificate to the node program. And now the node program can publish the latest block with the delay certificate so that the others can verify. Unless someone else has already published a block for that round. If someone else has published the block, then this node program does not need to publish the block because the other node is the winner. And the same program is run by every node, and that's how it achieves consensus. However, as you can see that the trusted execution environment needs to have access to a trusted timer to at least to know that the delay is correct. That's why we talk about two versions of elapsed-time consensus protocols. One, where the trusted execution environment have access to trusted timers, and another one where probably the trusted execution environment doesn't have access to a trusted timer, or the trusted execution environment itself can be compromised, or you probably have no TEs in the system. And we formally analyze the security for both the variations. Also, till now, there was no formal description of the proof of elapsed-time protocol by Intel, and our paper or our work can be considered as the first formal description of that protocol. And what security properties do you want to achieve? First is common prefix property, which means we want the honest parties to eventually agree on a common chain. Otherwise, there is no consensus. Also, we want the chain to grow at a certain rate. Otherwise, the protocol will stop. And we want a constant fraction of blocks in the accepted chain to be generated by honest parties. Otherwise, you cannot guarantee the quality of data in the blockchain or the correctness of the data. And the security of elapsed time consensus with trusted timer becomes really straightforward. If the trusted execution environments are incorruptible, then it achieves the exact security properties as Bitcoin. With exactly same parameters, with exact same assumptions. The property that it achieves is with an honest majority of players, it achieves with overwhelming probability the desired security properties that we want, namely common prefix property, chain growth property, and chain quality property. However, as I mentioned before, that TEs might not have access to a trusted timer, or some TEs are susceptible to attacks. For example, Intel SGX is susceptible to attacks like Spectre or Meltdown. And to defend against such attacks in our elapsed time consensus protocol, we need a construction called ZTest. What happens in ZTest? So ZTest is a verification which verifies that an honest party accepting the chain verifies that some other party has not generated too many blocks in a small amount of time in that chain. So that what it achieves, it effectively stops an adversary from concentrating high number of adversarial blocks in a small amount of time. And honest parties are highly unlikely to generate too many blocks in a small amount of time. So honest parties are affected with negligible probability. And with those facts, what we can prove for elapsed time consensus with ZTest. Elapsed time consensus with ZTest, also we can prove that with an honest majority of players, it achieves with overwhelming probability the desired security properties, namely common prefix, chain growth, and chain quality properties. Then what do we lose? The world cannot be all good. It is provably secure only in permission setting, compared to Bitcoin, which is provably secure in public setting. Also, elapsed time consensus with ZTest requires more honest parties compared to proof of work system, or even the elapsed time consensus with trusted timer version to achieve the same level of security. So that is the trade-off that is there. And now I'm going to talk about the implications of our results. With our results, we basically achieve a provably secure, scalable, decentralized database without high energy consumption or without high communication overhead. However, the trade-off is security is only in the permission setting, and we can tolerate much less number of dishonest parties compared to proof of work systems. In our case, we can tolerate only 33% dishonest parties, but proof of work can tolerate up to 49%. For recommendation, we recommend using the system with TEs and ZTest. So we know that there are only few dishonest parties, and then we get really good security. With that, I will finish my talk. Thanks for listening, and I will open the forum for questions.
Thank you, Devajyoti. Do you have any questions? In the chat, I don't see any questions yet. If anybody has, please put your questions in the chat. In the live feed, do we have any questions?
Let me ask to the participants if, yeah, okay. Yeah, there are some questions.
Hello. How that delay will be get calculated? Means how can we find the delay? Can you give some light on that?
The delay is picked from a probability distribution. In case of proof of elapsed time protocol, it is from an exponential distribution. So you pick a random number from from exponential distribution, and that will be the delay. And since it is generated by the T, and T generates the certificate, so the other parties, when they receive a block and the delay, they know that the delay is generated from this probability distribution by the TE. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. I don't think there are any further questions.
On the chat also, I don't see any questions. I have a question. So when you have been talking about this power consumption, you have been mostly talking about giving the example of Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is not a permission setting, right?
Yes, that's right.
So
Bitcoin is a public setting.
now let's say you have a distributed protocol, maybe using Hyperledger or something which is in permission setting.
Yes.
Then what is the comparison on the power?
It depends on the number of participants in the network. Of course, it will be as huge as Bitcoin. But independent of the number of participants, in proof of elapsed time protocols, you don't have to solve the cryptographic hard problem. And so you are so that is the saving that you have when you are using these low power alternatives.
And what about the proof of stake?
In case of proof of stake, there are two variations. One is one kind of variation that uses internally, it uses BFT consensus. And in that case, it's almost equivalent to using BFT consensus. And in another version, which is chain-based proof of stake, there are right now I don't have specific examples in my mind, but in those protocols, either they have strong security assumptions like some existence of some semi-trusted parties, or they lack a formal security proof. So that's why
here in TE you have this in a way strong security assumption that you need the trusted execution environment.
Yes, and that's why we mostly highlight on ZTest, not the TE.
Okay. All right. So we still have a couple of minutes if anybody wanted to ask questions. But so if you have a question, you may really want to type it now, bring it now. Looks like we don't have any questions, Devajyoti. Thank you for the talk. Hopefully, you will be able to do more progress on the topic and maybe provide some more numbers.
Just one quick question.
Yeah.
Regarding this, you are saying that the cryptographic hard problems, is it that it is the integer factorizations, discrete log problem, or Diffie-Hellman problem? Are you saying to that?
None of them. In case of Bitcoin, it's solving a hash. So you have to find a nouns which will produce a specific kind pattern of hash. And that is since hash functions are difficult to pre-image resistant, you have to actually keep solving hash for many nounces, and that is that's how you prove that you have done some work.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Devajyoti. And now we move to our second presentation of the session. It's on time release cryptography from minimal circuit assumptions. And by Samuel Jacks, Hart Montgomery, Razwan Rosie, and Arnab Roy. And Samuel Jacks will do the presentation. Yeah.
Hi. So that summarizes sort of what this talk is about, time release cryptography. And our goal was to use sort of lower the assumptions we need to make cryptographically. To give some background about what that means, in cryptography, we often focus on problems that are either infeasibly hard, so that they give some security to a scheme, or efficient to use, so that they're sort of polynomial time. But in a lot of cases, we want problems that we can solve in practice, but they're difficult in some way. And Bitcoin's proof of work is a great example of this. And Bitcoin's proof of work also highlights something else, which is that if you have more hardware, you can solve the problem faster. So if we imagine a big pile of GPUs compared to a smartphone, and they're both trying to mine Bitcoin, the GPUs will easily mine all the Bitcoin. What we want instead is a sequential function for certain applications. And so this will be hard in the same way. So we know it takes some non-trivial time, but where we cannot speed it up with more hardware. So the big pile of GPUs runs just as fast as a smartphone. We can formally define this by two parameters, TA and TC. So we say that this sequential function is sequential for this larger sub-exponential parameter, capital T, where sort of honest users that have a polynomial amount of hardware can iterate this function T times in time that's proportional to T with this proportionality constant T sub C. But an adversary who has a lot more hardware trying to iterate it T times is still computing it in time proportional to T. And there might be some difference in this proportionality. They might be able to shrink a little bit, but not too much. And these can form the basis for all kinds of time release cryptography. So these could include time lock puzzles, verifiable delay functions, or proofs of sequential work. And verifiable delay functions in particular have all kinds of applications in blockchain recently, such as verifiable lotteries, different kinds of consensus, maybe resource efficient blockchains. So there's been a lot of interest in verifiable delay functions in particular. And of course, you'd need some sort of sequential function to make one. And there's two main families of verifiable delay functions right now, based on either groups of unknown order or using any sequential function and throwing zero knowledge proofs on it. For groups of unknown order, the main idea is that if you square repeatedly, this should be sequential. So if I want to square T times and compute x to the 2 to the T, I shouldn't be able to do this any faster than just T squarings in a row. Now you can see that if we knew the group order, we could compute 2 to the T mod the group order and do this quickly. But if we don't know the group order, then this seems to be sequential. And there's good ways to verify this. And this seems like a fairly good solution. It's practical and it's probably completely fine. But our approach was trying to reduce the assumptions as much as possible. So some issues that you might raise with this is that, firstly, the squaring might not be sequential. It's a new assumption, and it hasn't been unconditionally proved to be related to any existing assumption. So we might live in a world where factoring is hard, but iterated squaring over an RSA modulus is actually can be parallelized. And in fact, we kind of live in this world because we can parallelize this squaring operation, but just very badly. And finally, it's not quantum secure because you can find the order of any group with a quantum computer. Our construction isn't either, but we just sort of, we're thinking about issues with this. The other thing that we could do to make a VDF is take any sort of random function and use snarks. So we can assume that a hash function is sequential if we just iterate it. So we apply the hash to the hash and we do this T times. And if we're in the random oracle model, this is provably sequential since every output is random. And to verify it, sorry. To verify this, we need generic snarks, and just sort of an argument of knowledge. And this sort of creates kind of a conceptual issue, which is that we can prove that these functions are sequential in a random oracle model, but this treats the hash function as a black box. But to use these zero knowledge proofs, we need to sort of open up this hash function and treat it as an actual circuit. And so this is kind of these feel kind of conflicting in a way. And this isn't a big issue, and I think it would be fairly reasonable to do this anyway. But basically our motivation was, what if you found all of these arguments very convincing and you wanted something, a much better guarantee on your sequential function? What can you do? So what we came up with was, starting from fully homomorphic encryption, we give a construction that will be sequential if there exists any sequential function. So for a time release cryptography to work at all, we'll definitely need some sequential function to exist. And the nice part about our construction is we don't need to know what this other function is, and our construction will be sequential. To explain, kind of sort of give some background on where this idea came from, this actually comes from proofs of knowledge for lattice systems. So imagine we have a function f, and we know that there's at least one very difficult input, but most inputs are quite easy. So imagine our adversary has this huge cluster of computers, and we want to force them to take a lot of computation. If we give them a random input x1, probably it's quite easy for them to compute f of x1. And maybe some x2, it's also very easy. But there's some hard input x3, and if we gave it to them, even their huge cluster of computers would have trouble. The problem is we might not know what this difficult input actually is. So we can't give it to the adversary and force them to do all this computation. The idea is that we encrypt everything and make everything, the adversary do everything with fully homomorphic encryption. So first we would encrypt the input, then give it to the adversary. And the adversary basically doesn't know what they're working with, so they have to sort of work in the case where it was the hardest input. So they produce some output and we can decrypt it. So they've equivalently computed f, but they're not sure how to compute f. They really sort of have to do a worst case circuit. And this is a little abstract, so I'll show how we construct a sequential function from this idea. So recall, here's the definition. We want a function where to iterate at t times, the time to do that must be proportional to t, no matter how much hardware you have. And from this, we can get a VDF. So imagine that we actually knew some sequential function. So they exist, we can write it down, we can write a circuit for it. Then it's very easy to make our VDF, we have a sequential function, there's nothing to do. And we have a guarantee based on the definition that the adversary must take time must take time t to compute f t times. From there, we use universal circuits. And this is a circuit that takes two inputs. One is sort of a regular bit string, and the other is a description of another circuit. And when you compute the universal circuit on the description of a circuit and an input, it has the same output as actually computing that circuit on that input. So it computes any circuit given a circuit as input, like a universal Turing machine or any sort of other universal computational device. So we change our sequential function slightly. And rather than computing the function directly, we write it as a circuit and compute the universal circuit with our sequential circuit as input. And because this gives the same output as a sequential function, then by definition, the adversary can't run faster than t. And maybe the honest users are running a little bit longer, but not too much longer because there's fairly limited overhead for a universal circuit. From there, we use fully homomorphic encryption. So what this does, homomorphic encryption allows us to encrypt data and then evaluate circuits on encrypted data so that when we decrypt them, it's the same as evaluating the circuit on the plaintext. But the nice part is to evaluate, you don't need the secret key. So anyone can evaluate, but you can only decrypt with the secret key. So what we do is the entire previous construction, but homomorphically. So we encrypt the input and then have the adversary evaluate the universal circuit on that input. But critically, we also encrypt the description of the circuit itself. So that's why we needed the universal circuit, so that we could encrypt our sequential function. And again, because at the end, we could decrypt the value, this is equivalent to computing the sequential function, and so the adversary can't do this in faster than time t. But now the adversary thinks to themselves, all they were given were 2 encrypted strings. How did they know we actually gave them a sequential function? What if we gave them a different function? Would they be able to cheat? So here's sort of their perspective. Thanks to the snarks, everyone can verify their output. So they need to compute things correctly. They can't cheat by computing a different function, even though they don't know the function. If the encrypted input was really a sequential function, there's nothing they can do. By definition, they can't compute it any faster than time t, even with all of their hardware. So that doesn't help them at all. If we'd given them a different function, then maybe there's some way they could parallelize and still get a correct answer. But the adversary's central problem is they cannot decide which situation they're in because their input was encrypted. So they have to do some computation that will take at least time t. Otherwise, they break semantic security of the homomorphic encryption. So what we actually do in our construction that we defined is, rather than encrypting a sequential function, which we don't actually know, I can't actually tell you if something is sequential, we just encrypt 0. And even though it's not sequential, we can prove that the adversary has to take as much time as a sequential function. Otherwise, they've broken semantic security of the FHE, because if they're computing it faster, we know they've sort of detected that we've encrypted 0 rather than a sequential function. So this construction at the end no longer needs knowledge of the sequential function. We can just instantiate this with things that we know how to do already. There's already constructions for universal circuits and for fully homomorphic encryption. So in some sense, this one really exists. You really could program it. We didn't, because it's hopelessly impractical at this point. The overheads of the homomorphic encryption and the universal circuit are polynomial, but they're quite big. So this was mainly a sort of a theoretical idea on how a sequential function could be made in this way. In the full paper, you can see we account carefully for all of the overheads. We look at different computational models for sequential functions and when certain inputs could come in. And we look at how this applies to the actual applications of sequential functions, like VDFs. I think a big takeaway from our talk and our work is that this tool to use fully homomorphic encryption to take a worst case problem to an average case problem, I think is quite a powerful tool. Basically, anytime you have a worst case assumption, if you encrypt everything with fully homomorphic encryption, then you can kind of force an adversary to work with the worst case, even based on an average case scenario. And so if you find yourself in this kind of situation, I recommend thinking of fully homomorphic encryption as a tool that can maybe help. Thanks for listening, and here are the references.
Thank you, Sam. Do we have any questions from the online audience? I don't see any in this chat.
Any questions? No such question from the hall.
From the live audience. Okay, so maybe I'll ask a question, and meanwhile, if there are more questions online, they can come. So Sam, my question is this, when the adversary does this evaluation of the circuit, the output is still encrypted, right?
Yes.
So now they just deliver the encrypted output, and let's say I'm the one who challenged. So I decrypt and verify if they did the job correctly, right?
In our case, we imagined a scenario where you wouldn't decrypt the output, because if the circuit is all zeros, then you should be getting all zeros out. We imagine sort of like with the hash function, you take a zero knowledge proof, a generic zero knowledge proof, and put that on top of all of the other computations. So you're doing a zero knowledge proof that you did the homomorphic evaluation correctly.
So they find evaluation correctly. That in this sense, the adversary is going to provide that. Was that your thing?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I think your question cut out for me.
It could be maybe my internet messed up. So the question is this: like when we are doing this scenario with the adversary, but whether it be adversary or whether it be a correct evaluator, they do the evaluation, and at the end they need to provide a proof to us that they did the evaluation correctly. What is happening there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So to prove that it's sequential, then just by definition we want them to output the correct answer. Otherwise, sort of they haven't correctly computed it. If you wanted to use
that's my question. That how do I know that they have done without decryption? How do I know that they have output the correct answer?
So what you would do is you would use since you know the circuit for the evaluation that they have to perform. Sort of each instance of the homomorphic evaluation is some circuit that everyone knows. You can ask for a generic proof that that circuit was computed correctly using snarks. And so this would be the same. Basically, it's the same construction as building a VDF out of a hash function, where you would look at the circuit for the hash function, and you would verify it by simply verifying that they computed the circuit correctly, and you can kind of incrementally verify using these constructions. And ours really isn't different from the hash function case. We're just using this rather complicated construction kind of to act like a hash function. And the benefit is really just a theoretical guarantee that where a hash function might not be sequential, ours, must be as sequential as the most sequential hash function.
I think Anwar, we still have 2 more minutes. Any other questions on the chat?
Okay, I have a small query. I want to know that proof of concept which you have mentioned, is it possible to implement in non-time series sequences or non-time series applications also?
I think our particular application I'm not sure that it would be helpful outside of time series applications, but I think very similar constructions could be useful elsewhere.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it seems like an interesting work, and given that right now it is completely out of bounds for actual implementations, so I'm guessing there is a lot of options for the people to come here and break their heads and try to make it useful. Practical. So there is a lot of, in that sense, it opens up a lot of possibilities for a lot of research. So, governments, it seems interesting to me, and I think if we can somehow work on this, right now we are using this universal circuit. If we can work on hiding our circuit without using a completely generic universal circuit, maybe that can start to make it more efficient. Okay, with that in mind, I think let's thank Sam, and we can move to Hamid Reza. So this is our last paper of the last session. So this is the last paper to be presented at Indocrypt. And the paper is Succinct Publicly Certifiable Proofs, or Can a Blockchain Verify a Designated Verifier Proof? I've read the paper. I found it very interesting and hope the audience also finds it equally interesting. So this paper is by Matthew Campanelli and Hamid Reza Khoshklag. And Hamid Reza will present. Up to you, Hamid Reza. Are you on mute, Hamid?
Sorry, I think I was muted. Do you hear me?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So thanks, Vishal, for the introduction. So I'm happy to present my second paper. So I will be talking about our work. It's called Succinct Publicly Certifiable Proofs, or Can a Blockchain Verify a Designated Verified Proof? This is a joint work with Matthew Campanelli. So, okay, let me begin with the notion of argument system in the trust model. So in this model, we have three types of parties. We have a trusted party, and then we have a prover and verifier. The prover wants to convince the verifier that some statement X is in some language. And then there is a trusted party who generate a string. It's called the common reference S string, give this string to both the prover and verifier. And they use this string to run the protocol. And at the end, the verifier decide to accept the proof of the prover or just reject. And then in argument system, we have completeness property, which says that an honest prover can always convince an honest verifier. Soundness, which says that a dishonest prover should not be able to convince the verifier with a non-negligible probability. And then the type of argument system we are interested in this work are of type non-interactive, meaning that there is only one flow of communication between the prover and verifier. So the prover just send send a proof in one flow of communication to the verifier. It's zero knowledge, meaning that the proof doesn't reveal any information about the witness, and in fact any information except the fact that the statement is in the language. The proof is succinct, meaning that it's polylogarithmic in the size of the statement and witness, and it's a proof of knowledge, meaning that at the end we can make sure that the prover already knows the witness. Or this is something which is called ZK snark, zero knowledge snark, and we have two types of snark. One is called publicly verifiable, and the other is called designated verifier. So in publicly verifiable snark, the trusted party gives one single string called CRS to both the prover and verifier, and they use this unique string to verify the proof. The prover and verifier use the same string, but in designated verifier string, the string is different. So there is a public string called the CRS that the prover use, and the verifier use a string which is not public anymore. It's something designated to the verifier, and by that string, the verifier can verify the proof. And it is important that now the soundness property of the argument is it holds only if we assume that the prover doesn't know this secret string VRS. And then the motivation for introducing this notion of ZK snark is their application in this decentralized network. So if we consider the first generation of cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin, the type of privacy they provide is not very good. So actually, you can see everyone's balance and how they spend, how the people spend their money. But then we have in the next generation, we have cryptocurrencies with much better privacy. So in fact, they hide all this information about the transactions and keep the privacy of the users by using this primitive, the ZK snark. And one important property of this ZK snark is that they should be publicly verifiable, meaning that when a party approver publish a proof, everyone should be able to verify if the proof is correct, is valid or not. And the reason is that there is usually a consensus that all the parties should have a consensus on the fact that whether the proof should be accepted or not. And for that, it's more efficient to have a proof that is publicly verifiable and all the users can prove. Otherwise, the prover should send one proof to every party, which is something very inefficient. And then the question we ask is that how we can construct this type of publicly verifiable snark. So we know that there are some restrictions, some requirement. For example, we should use non-standard assumptions because of some impossibility results. But the question is that can we construct this type of publicly verifiable snark in a constrained setting where we require post-quantum security, which means that we cannot use pairing-based snark anymore because pairing is not post-quantum. And the assumptions to be as nice as possible, meaning that no random oracle. We have several snark that are based on random oracle. So no random oracle, no pairing, and also no non-standard assumptions such as obfuscation, for example. And the question is, can we construct publicly verifiable snark in this setting? So we know how to construct designated verifier snark in this setting, but we know that it's not enough for our application, that we need something which can be verified publicly. But now the question is how this publicly verifiable snark and designated verifier snark are comparable. Is there any inherent gap between the two types, the two variations? And that's the main purpose of this work. We try to fill this gap by defining an intermediate model. We define an intermediate model, we call it SPAC, or succinct publicly certifiable proof. And then we show how to construct this type of, how to construct a SPAC based on threshold, fully homomorphic encryption, homomorphic signature, and designated verifier snark. And then we also generalize it into proactive setting that I will explain all these three items in more detail in the next slides. So let me begin with the model we defined for SPAC. So in our model, we have a committee of size n, where this committee is holding a secret. So each committee member has a share of this secret. And this secret is such that it allows the committee members to certify a proof. So what do I mean? We assume that we have a prover as before, it just published a proof. So this proof pi0 is not publicly verifiable. But then we have a committee that is sharing a secret. And this committee, by looking at this proof pi0, they generate a certificate and then collecting some threshold number of these certificates, some valid certificates. If we combine these valid certificates, some threshold number of these valid certificates, we can verify publicly if the proof can be accepted or not. So at the beginning, as I said, the prover just publish a proof pi0. Then we have committee members that each generate a certificate. And now, by collecting a threshold number of these certificates, we can verify the proof. So more formally, a SPAC is defined as follows. We have a setup that takes as input NP relation and threshold parameters D and N, and output some public parameters and a set of verification keys for each committee member. Then we have a proof algorithm that takes a statement and a witness and output a proof pi0. Pi0 is just a standard proof. You can see it as a designated verifier proof. And then we have part cert algorithm that takes one of these secret shares, SKI, the statement and this proof pi0, and output some partial proof or partial certificate pi which is coming from the certifier I. And then there is an algorithm that verifies if this certificate is generated correctly or not. And at the end, a set of these certificates pi combined together can verify the proof. Output a zero. We have a verification algorithm that takes pi0 and a bunch of these pi and outputs 0 or 1, depending on whether the proof should be accepted or not. And then we define several properties for this primitive that I am skipping in this presentation, but they are mostly standard properties that we know. Let me explain a bit about the construction and intuition behind the construction. So the construction is from threshold fully homomorphic encryption, homomorphic signature, and designated verifier snark. So the idea is that in the setup, we just run the key generation of a designated verifier snark. By key generation, I mean an algorithm that output a CRS and the secret key corresponding to the CRS, the trapdoor. So I call it here EK and VK, meaning evaluation key and verification key. And then we also run the key generation of threshold fully homomorphic encryption. We get a key pair. And then the public parameters are just the evaluation key of the designated verifier snark, the public key of the TFHE, and a ciphertext, which is the encryption of the verification key, the encryption of the designated verifier snark verification key. And then we secret share the secret key of the threshold fully homomorphic encryption and give each share to the corresponding certifier. So the prover just run the designated verifier prover, given a statement and evaluation key of the designated verifier snark, and the witness, it compute a proof, which is designated, it can be verified by a designated verifier, not publicly. And then we have part cert, that is the algorithm that each certifier run. So the certifier run the TFHE evaluation of the circuit C on ciphertext CT, which is part of the public parameters. So what is this C? The C is the circuit corresponding to the verification of the designated verifier snark by hard-coded parameters, a statement, and the proof pi 0. So only the verification key of the designated verifier snark is unknown here. And each party compute the ciphertext and then run the partial decryption on this ciphertext and get some output yi. And also it also compute a signature, a homomorphic signature that certify this computation is computed correctly. So the proof pi I, the certificate, consists of a partial decryption and a homomorphic signature. And then part cert verify just verify the homomorphic signature part of the proof. And then the verification is by combining D out of N valid yi, proof yi, and by combining them and running the decryption algorithm of the threshold fully homomorphic encryption, we can verify the proof. And the important thing is that all these primitives can be constructed based on lattice assumptions, such as LWE, which means that now we have a construction of post-quantum spark from lattices. And because this type of, because a spark can be seen it looks very similar to publicly verifiable snark with one more hub in the middle, that is the committee members. So it's somehow a middle ground between designated verifier snark and publicly verifiable snark based on lattice assumptions. So far I was only considering a static committee, but in applications we usually have a proactive committee, meaning that in round one we have a committee, and then in the next round the committee change, in the next round. So in each round, after every several round, we have a new committee members. And for that, we introduce a new notion. We extend and generalize our notion of a spark to proactive spark, where in this case the committee can change dynamically. And then we also extend our construction in previous construction into proactive case. But in the new construction, we also require circular security for the underlying fully homomorphic encryption. So to summarize, we introduced this model of succinct publicly certifiable proof that provides public verifiability. And then we give a construction based on threshold fully homomorphic encryption, homomorphic signature, and designated verifier snark that all can be instantiated by lattice, and so it's post-quantum. And then at the end, we also extend the construction into proactive Spark, where the committee is not fixed anymore, and it can dynamically reshare the secret to the next committee members. So that was my talk. Thanks for your attention. And for more details, you can also check the full version on ePrint.
Thank you, Hamid Reza. And do we have any questions for Hamid Reza?
Anyone, any question, any suggestions? Okay. There is one question from Professor Gordi.
Does your work, meaning the model and the derivations, have anything to say on the cardinality of the committee, upper limit, lower limit?
Yeah, I think there is because of one constraint we have for the FHE construction, it should be a constant size.
Constant size, but no indication on what the constant is, or there is an indication?
I don't think there is any condition, and just any constant, I think it should work.
I see. Okay, maybe
I mean, independent of the size of the whole
card. Okay.
User, yeah.
Independent. Okay. Nice presentation.
So do we have any other questions? So I don't see there are any online questions. And from live feed, do you have any more questions?
No, not from this side.
Just a continuation of the previous question that on the number of committee members. So in the dynamic setting, this number can change, right?
Right, exactly. But there is no issue from this aspect, because the resharing is just, we are using some proactive secret sharing schemes that the number of shares, the number of parties that for which we share the secret, it's not fixed. Okay. So in round one, it can be N1, in round two, it can be N2. So
in that sense, the number can change if committees change in the dynamic setting at least, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, means I found the paper very interesting. Of course, the proofs were very difficult to verify. I must have spent almost 2 weeks on the paper, and I'm still not sure if I got all the proofs, but very interesting paper and something I want to read more on. So thank you for providing the link to the full paper. Does it have more than what is in the published paper?
Yeah, I think because of the page limit, we skipped some. I mean, we refer the reader to the full version for many details. So I think it's more. It has more than the submitted.
Okay. So looks like there are no questions, and we are anyway almost close to 7:30. If the online viewers they have questions, they can of course go to the Google Talks for these 3 speakers, and you can ask questions one-to-one with them. And that's it. I think this concludes all the presentation sessions of Indocrypt, and there will be a valedictory session which will start just right about now. So thank you, Hamid Reza. Let's thank all the 3 speakers. Chair. Thank you.
And a special thanks to the session chair, Professor Vishal and Professor Abhishek, for joining with us. Please do join us to the valedictory session of the conference with Dr. Sheta right from the venue. Thank you.